Hello and welcome back to a brand new podcast that's trying to do things differently by giving you the inside track on the data and analysis that reveals how the business of elite sport really ticks. In response to a need for an independent voice in such a cluttered and noisy environment, Leonard Curtis has launched the Business of Sport series aimed to provide validated sets of financial data plus professional commentary for major sports all in one place. It's a one-stop shop for cutting-edge sports research. As part of their multi-channel campaign, we're delighted to welcome you to the second episode of our first podcast series entitled Sport Structured. Put quite simply, it's all the facts and figures you need to know from the people who know what they're talking about, and backed by Leonard Curtis, who have more than 3 decades of expertise in recovery and turning things around. We started our series by examining the state of rugby union and cricket domestically in conjunction with market-leading financial studies led by Leonard Curtis. Now, as they say, timing is everything, and Leonard Curtis have turned their expert eyes to the world of elite golf with a groundbreaking new report that shows exactly whether the sport's positioned nicely on the green or looking up from the bottom of a bunker. I'm delighted to say I'm joined here in the wonderful new UCFB Manchester broadcast studio by 3 titans whose knowledge and insight is contained within the Leonard Curtis Golf Report. First up, someone who's an expert in restructuring and knows what it takes to flourish in elite sport, Alex Cadwallader. Alongside the brawn of a rugby union winger is the brains of an academic in Professor Rob Wilson. And finally, next to me, someone who knows everything there is to know about professional golf is going right now. Sky Sports golf analyst and coach to a host of big names, Simon Holmes. Simon's also the man who wrote the foreword to the Golf Report, declaring there's no version of the future for golf that looks like the past. What a place to start. Welcome, by the way. Lovely to meet you, Simon.
Thank you so much, James.
Alex is very, very fervent on being positive, and that's what we try and do here. We try and make this data-led, try and make it research-backed, and we try to come up with recommendations where sport might go. But starting like that, it sounds like golf right now doesn't know where it wants to go, or doesn't know who needs to lead it, or what the future looks like. There's so many unknowns right now, and it's moving by the second, by the day, isn't it?
Yes, so many times I think we probably look back at changes, 10 years after they've happened and try to analyze them. Well, in this case, golf hasn't changed much up until sort of that 221, 222 season when LIV came in and really challenged that existing ecosystem, that model. And so this is sort of a real-time view. Headlines are being made as we speak right now. New dynamics are coming. We don't know what will happen to LIV, the challenger. We do probably know what will happen to the PGA Tour, but if it does win, how will it behave to the rest of the ecosystem? Those are all the things I'm going to uncover.
There are forwards and there are forwards, and in yours, it almost seems to be the passion seeping through, because this is a game that you're obviously massively in love with and enamored with. But also worried where it's all going and what's going to lead and what it's going to become. Is that fair?
I think that is fair. I see that, and I think we've seen it in other sports, other commodities, where that big money arrow kind of, it comes slowly, but once it stops on something, I just see that it can easily destroy the place it lands. And so as a passionate golfer, I would like to see the best players play against each other on the best courses for something that's meaningful. I would like to see the top support the bottom in golf. So I think that, you need the bottom of the pyramid needs to have new talent and new playing opportunities. I think there's a lot of quality in the game from what you can learn as a young person. And I would hope that the beneficiaries on the top will really remember where they came from. PGA Tour has always been amazing at having sort of supporting charity. $4 billion gifted in the United States for very important charities. I think that's a little bit of our signature, a little bit of our sort of movement as we have that in the sport. For a mum and a dad to play with their kids, you don't want that to be damaged.
Alex, I talked about research being cutting edge. You've got your timing absolutely right on this. How much work went into deciding golf was going to be the next place that Leonard Curtis kind of placed its hat?
I think, we'd always been focused on it with the changes that Simon has mentioned. The fact that you had a disruptor coming in with some financial might and challenging the way that golf was to be run and then absorbed by the audience. it was, a prime sport for us to look at. And, there have always been concerns. And, with my background, I've always looked at what is LIV's business model? What are we meant to be looking at? What are the metrics that are going to show that there will be a return on this investment? Because ultimately, sport has to be able to deliver that. And for the numbers that were being thrown around, and I think I spoke to you previously, James, you ask anyone on the street, would you prefer to buy Newcastle Football Club or hire John Rahm for 3 years? What do you think is going to be a better return for the same amount of money? So I think it was a sport that was right for us to have a look at and try and understand the changes they're trying to push through. But as Simon says, what are the implications and what are we left with when you've had all this? The other tours have had to respond to LIV, and what has happened to those now that LIV are now wobbling.
I guess it also helps when the business of business is done on the golf course, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. It's it is a sport that's very lucky that it does attract commercial enterprises, and a lot of people enjoy playing that sport, and it ticks boxes for lots of different people, and you want that to continue. But it's not about the corporate golf world. It's, as Simon says, it's about the children coming through, and LIV was attempting to grow the game of golf, but in reality, has it really done that? And has the spending been pushed in a way that actually the tours can't invest in the ways they have historically, because they've been chasing to keep players on their tours?
Rob, I think while the pair of them were talking about handicaps and driving and putting, I think both of us were battling to take the caddy or the tee or the car out. I'm not sure about the organic process between you and Alex when it comes to picking a topic, but when he said golf, was it yippee or?
I needed to read up on golf as an ecosystem. So some of the stuff Simon educated me on over lunch about the dynamics of the tours, about how the players are ranked, about how the local golf clubs are so integral to the underpinning of the ecosystem, and how then when it starts getting really interesting for me, the money flows and who's taking what out of the game. The difference is really between ostensibly an individual sport, although I've been educated about how it's also a team sport and there are league formats, but how an individual sport can generate its own economic value, and actually be much more sustainable as a model than we see in some of the professional teams. We spoke about some of them in episode 1. We'll speak about some of them on later episodes of this podcast. So how that individually driven market, that highly commodified, commercialized product, was being driven across effectively westernized territories. And then we have this disruptive force, which is great when we're talking about governance and regulation and structuring. How this disruptive force was trying to do things very differently, engaging new audiences, at least from my perspective, promoted towards families, big entertainments, almost music festival. We spoke about sportainment, didn't we, on the first episode? So how they were going to do that against, of course, a backdrop of public investment fund of Saudi Arabia, sovereign wealth, soft power, sport, call it whatever you want. The amount of money that was going into sport from that region to really validate the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a place for sport. And we've seen it, of course, haven't we, with boxing, we've seen it with Formula One, we've seen it with golf. Obviously, they're going to start divesting now, but they've still got some big principal assets knocking around the globe that are all funded in a similar way.
Simon, I asked the gentleman in pod 1 about the health of the sport and rugby union on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being dying man, 10 being a superhuman super being. Where would you categorize golf right now between 0 and 10?
I think it's on the table and it's just about to get, the big shock. So it'll be very interesting to see how all of the different players behave. For the first time ever, the PGA Tour, which has been just a governing body, really non-profit organization, and has had kind of like a linear series of maybe connected or disconnected events running, for 11 months of the year, and now has got external equity coming in, right? So that means that the behavior is going to be different. The focus is going to be different. So they're not just delivering this sort of very linear ecosystem. Now they're actually going to have people who go, where's the profit? Where's my money? Where's the return? Are they going to behave differently? Connected. You've also got now player equity, right? So instead of just having a prize money driven reward system now. Those players will now have they are a part of the group, and then you've got PGA Tour Super Mighty, right? Looks stable, looks as though it's solved all its problems, and it's knocked away the competitor. DP World Tour, passionate of mine. It's global. It has the media package which LIV doesn't have. It has a huge pipeline of players. It has a long history. Definitely leans heavily on the financial support from the PGA Tour. If the PGA Tour starts to think about, okay, where all my P&L's going, hey, listen, do I need that DP World Tour anymore? You don't want that. You don't want that to be, this power to disable this, right? And I think that if it's all America centric, which is PGA Tour with their very easy viewing hours across their time zones, it is important to have children, for example, able to watch a meaningful competition, which DP World has always been able to do, being a much more global tour. So I hope that behavior will be looked at as a part of, yes, you make your money 100%, totally get that, but also don't, when you leave and you take all your money, destroy what was there already.
It's the problem, Alex, that, and I'm sorry, Rob.
No, it's fine. I was just going to pick up on that equity stake piece. So we wouldn't have expected that from a sport like golf. I think most of us as analysts would be looking at, excuse me, Premier League football, Major League Soccer, NFL. Where are those new ideas coming from to reward players in a slightly different way rather than just throwing cash at player contracts? So it's fascinating that golf has gone down that route. Part of that was probably because of the push they were getting from LIV, the need to change, to modernise, to extend their brand exposure. But what we also know about players in themselves and athletes is that they are carrying much more value to the market now as digital platforms have appeared, as new ways of promoting brands have appeared. We've started to see new fandoms. So individuals like us following individual players as opposed to teams. So connecting the power of the person with the sport, I think, is a fascinating next step for any professional sport ecosystem. And I think golf will reap the rewards of that because of the superstars that are playing.
But you have to be almost an academic to understand what's going on, bearing in mind the PGA Tour made a loss, but PGA Enterprises didn't. And then we're talking about illiquid equity. And I don't know if anyone here, you'll know, Alex, what that involves, but this is stuff from accountancy and business. It's not stuff from sport.
Yeah, illiquid generally means that you can't just go and trade it without an event happening or meeting certain parameters. But yes, you're right. And ultimately, it's become Simon, before LIV, was there a general feeling amongst the world's top 50 players that they were ridiculously underpaid?
No, I would say quite the reverse. If you look at sort of the catalysts for significant changes in prize money, I would say Tiger Woods' arrival and 1997 and the enormous spotlight that followed that man. And the huge increases in the media coverage, which was organic growth, it was valued into the system properly. There were this many more people watching, and so therefore it became that much more valuable. Tiger made all of his contemporaries millions and millions and millions in prize money, right? Now I would say, there must be a way of factoring. Let's suppose you were to say, okay, what is a sustainable system? And if we looked at perhaps the Players' Championship as maybe the one that's not a major, but it's the best of the PGA Tour events because it's a great course. It's in Jacksonville. It's very popular, and mostly the top 50 players plus play in that. If you looked at the maths and you said, could you have a prize money much more than 10 million in total and it be sustainable, in which case every single person contributing would be able to make the money that they wanted out of it? It might only be 10 million. That's about as much as you can have in prize money. So with the players sweeping the table and having 8 events at 20 million, they've done that as a reaction, as a defense against LIV's aggressive move if LIV can't do that anymore, I would see that will be a place where there could be a real change in terms of player compensation.
Yeah, just wondering on the liquid equity, I love that phrase, Rob. Will the PGA Tour be looking at and thinking, blimey, we moved too quickly on that. We maybe wasted 200 million on Tiger or 200 million on Rory when we didn't need to do that because the bad man's going away.
Yeah, that comes down to strategy and happenstance, doesn't it? So did we in 95, 96, I was going through school at the time, I remember Tiger breaking through. Did we really know he was going to be the superstar that he became? Did we know that he was going to get that huge backing from Nike and become the face of golf? I remember growing up watching him on adverts and that, I'm Tiger Woods, I'm Tiger Woods. That was an explosion of a personal athlete that was connected with golf. We've seen similar with the likes of Lewis Hamilton in Formula One. David Beckham probably rings the bell the most in professional football. We were chatting about Maro Itoje, weren't we, off pod earlier on. That there are always going to be these iconic athletes that emerge, but it's very difficult to plan for them. So I don't think any of the tours will be looking at it thinking that was a missed opportunity, we didn't need to spend that. I think it's more a case now of how do we leverage that and how do we deal with, actually what we're seeing in golf is an uptick in player performance, because no longer are we seeing single player dominance. We are seeing it spread across a vast number of different athletes, aren't we? From your time when you were coaching Nick Faldo, was one of the top 2 or 3 in the world, and it would be the same people that would be fighting for those championships, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think in the Tiger years, it was interesting because I think if you were a fan of Tiger and he didn't really, like his competitors never really played that well. So the rivalries didn't function that well.
Did they?
Duval, not amazing. VJ, not amazing. Ernie, not amazing. He was the gladiator, right? And so he dominated it. Now you could say, okay, you're a Scotty Scheffler fan. I'm a Rory McIlroy fan. Let's see what happens, right? Or there's 2 or 3 different people, and so rivalries act also in an interesting way of accumulating eyeballs. And so I think that the PGA Tour, as long as you keep seeing these different stars rising up, which means your pipelines have got to be really, really efficient so that your talent appears, right? Then that's extremely healthy for the ecosystem.
Yeah, and we see that it just tears up and tears up and tears up. We spoke about on the first pod about the need to, almost without being too academic, the joint nature of production says you can only have a game of football if you've got 2 teams. You can only have a golf competition if you've got, I don't know how many people play in the cut, 25 top players that are in that final round. And that's what generates the huge sponsorships that we see in golf, the huge broadcast deals, and therefore the huge purses that players are ending up.
But I know in the research you talk about the pyramid, obviously, at a very wide base of club players.
That's enormous.
Is it healthy though? I mean, is it doing the things it needs to do to provide for the tip of the pyramid?
Simon's probably a better place to comment. There's certainly work to do at the grassroots. There are, huge, as we've get with lots of sports, huge access issues. If you're not brought up having played golf, how do you access that? I was not from a golfing family, so I didn't pick up a club until I was probably in my mid-20s when I was playing crazy golf on a lads' holiday. So I think access is always going to be a challenge, but those local golf clubs are kind of sustainable businesses in their own right. They are generating decent amounts of revenue, and that's ultimately where the path will have to exist. Hence, you've got your golf pros in clubs and the coaching opportunities that sit around that.
Alex, I know you're always challenging yourself. What does good look like? What does good look like when it comes to golf? And
not
like getting anywhere near?
By the way,
I think I've mentioned to you, I can imagine LIV Golf will be a case study for the next 25 years at various business schools across the globe. And the next 7 months with these new restructuring M&A investment advisors that have been appointed to the board of golf. And they have got a very challenging task of trying to sell a product which currently is proven as being horrendously loss-making. LIV themselves have come out previously and said, well, don't look at the viewing figures and those metrics. We're judging it on something else. So, I think if LIV had come across a product, a model that worked and did actually achieve what they publicly said they were looking to achieve, then that's great. That's good competition that strives the PGA to change, and the whole sport can benefit from that. But what it appears to have done, the only different model they've got really is paying the players a hell of a lot of money and not actually generating anywhere near the revenue. And the impact of LIV is that the PGA Tour has had to take decisions to try and push their prize money up that I don't think are good for the foundations of the game. And that's the real impact of it. It's a full-on disruption, but what was the PR's ultimate game with that investment into LIV? They're already in sport. You know, the Middle East companies and wealth funds sponsor some of our big events already. They sponsor the European Tour, DP World Tour. Appreciate it's not necessarily linked to particular kingdoms. You know, the Saudi oil company sponsors parts of the women's tour, a couple of events. So they already and they had major events there. So what were they really trying to achieve, other than, you know, as Rob mentioned, you know, trying to disrupt, achieve something else other than finding a better financial model? And the implications of that are dangerous for the game. The advantage golf has is that it is still a growing sport, that is still, the viewing figures are fantastic. It still attracts a lot of investment. So I would expect it to ride its way through this. I don't think the PGA Tour is suddenly going to collapse. And I'm sure the DP World Tour will come to some sort of agreement. But, you know, ultimately, it does hopefully it gives a real big warning to other sports to think about the implications of what can happen. The argument is, what could you do to stop it?
I was going to say, isn't that the key issue? We don't even know what this is all about, do we?
Well, when it first started in sort of, and there was sort of little chats going on, as I understood it, what the Saudis really wanted to do, they will build a big coastline full of golf resorts on their Red Sea coast, right? And what they wanted all of us to do was go and play golf there. So what they first wanted to do was to get into the golf scene, start to perhaps have 3 big events in Saudi where all the best players would come. That was, as I understood it, the very first ambition. And then I think they met people like Greg Norman and other people who suggested that there was another way. I think the Saudis were rejected by the PGA Tour, and maybe that was a catalyst for them to sort of decide, okay, actually, we will do this tour. But they did it in such a strange way, as you said, Alex. You know, they invested billions into securing talent, but with no media distribution. Right? Absolutely no media distribution, and so their build outs, their player costs, their prize money, compared to any type of revenue stream or distribution, so we could really watch it. You could watch it on YouTube. That, I think, was a real fundamental error. You know, if you look at some, I mean, like maybe F1 teams are the only thing which could possibly kind of compare. You've got Liberty Media's got an enormous package of distribution. It's totally organized. The platform is safe because, you know, if I'm investing into this, here are my returns and that's a very clear model. With no media partner, and as it sort of I'll build it and they will come, was an incredibly dangerous business decision.
And it's incongruent with a lot of the other things they've done. So the F1 Grand Prix is strategically delivered. The investment in Newcastle United is tied to a big Premier League and international broadcast rights deal. Even the Riyadh season, the boxing, the MMA stuff that they're looking at delivering, have much more strategically driven broadcast rights. I almost think they sort of jumped the gun with the YouTube, with going onto YouTube, so saying our audience is going to be these young people that are bored and they don't want to watch 56 holes of golf over the course of a weekend. They want to see a shorter format. They want it to be a bit glitzy and glamoury, and eyeballs are on the screen, and we'll generate some revenue from YouTube clips. And it just never came, because you have to enable your audience to access. And nobody knew about it over in the kind of the mass market. The golf audience will have known about it and will have decided, yes, I'm going to tune in because I'm interested, or no, I don't agree with it and therefore I'm not going to. But they haven't captured that additional market, and it's fallen apart very, very quickly.
Yeah, they
as a
took an
result.
approach, and you'd look back at it, and they almost wanted to do everything differently. Let's only play 3 rounds. Let's not have a cut. Let's all play at the same time, and really challenge it and say this is for a new audience. And when you get, and I understand that when you go and watch an event, it's quite different, and actually the on-course experience can be quite good, as opposed. And they would always pick just a sleepy PGA Tour event that was between some Masters that not many people go to. But actually, if you look at the crown jewel, the Open or the Masters, part of golf is the tradition, and they don't make massive changes to that. So I wouldn't. LIV hasn't identified a new model or a new product that the PGA Tour wouldn't have found anyway. They would have been alive to the fact that Bryson going on Instagram and trying to do a hole-in-one over his house is going to garner more and more eyeballs. But that's not really driven by what LIV's product was and what their business plan was.
So taking on that and asking you a business question, if you were to get the call from the people trying to restructure LIV, is it, I'm not here, thanks very much, or is there an answer to?
It's a challenge. You have got a model that is proven as being horrendously loss-making. The investment has gone into talent based on contracts that will come to an end. Whether you can even meet the remainder of those contracts without the fund, it's a very challenging sell. And I think most commentators don't expect LIV to get the funding that they require to meet the outgoings they have for the players already signed up. So it wouldn't be a particularly easy task. You'd want to be paid up front, and you wouldn't necessarily want a success fee. So yeah, it'll be a tough assignment.
Simon, you're the expert. You know the fabric of golf. A two-pronged question: did all the people that went to LIV not surprise you? Bearing in mind the characters, and then the second question: that can you believe the sums of money that some of those golfers whose names aren't known across the planet are being paid? When you look at the list that Rob came up with, you've got 70 and 90 million pound a year players. Who could walk down Manchester High Street without being recognised?
Yeah, I would say I think if Mickelson, I think, was the first guy who went, and if you compare, let's say, Mickelson to Woods, both were offered a deal. Tiger says no, I'm going to stay with the tour because that's kind of my legacy. Mickelson goes, actually, yeah, slightly renegade attitude, right? And then Brooks Koepka, slightly renegade. Dustin Johnson, Patrick Reed, Cam Smith was a very surprising one to me. John Rahm was a very surprising one to me. But they're all just that little tiny bit outside of the boys' club. Mm-hmm. And I think the boys' club kind of held the line. Tiger called Rory called da-da-da-da, and they said, hold the line. And they held the line. And then on terms of the pricing, I'm amazed that I hear that Mickelson was 200 million, right? Now I don't know how they negotiated that, or whether you just said to Greg Norman, "Hey, listen, can I be 200 million?" Is that right? I'll be 100.
It's quite an easy negotiation.
Well, is that okay?
Yeah,
perfect. And then those first 12 players, and they took an important part of the golf population. So. Like, my problem with it is I'm a golf fan, so I watch a lot of golf, and now I don't get to see the best players play against each other, and then the ones who have gone to LIV haven't improved their game. I feel like everyone else, so I don't care about the tours or the players or whatever. I'm the one who's wounded. I'm the worst person off from this whole set of decision makings, and I'm the golf fan. I'm the passionate golf fan. I'm the worst off. Who's out there trying to make me whole?
The only thing I'd say is devil's advocate, and we touched on this earlier. Sometimes I think scarcity of seeing, a particular player, not every weekend, I think can be beneficial, but overrides, as in, when we were growing up, you only got to see Maradona during the World Cup. Whereas, if you have all the best players playing against each other every week, whereas now we sort of get, well, actually it's 4 times or maybe 5 times a year with the Ryder Cup, seeing these titans. But, putting that to one side, I fully agree with Simon. Taking the bigger picture view, yes, we've been denied, seeing those players develop, and everyone talks about, are those players able to perform at the level they have been historically, because they're playing on courses that are totally different, set up all around the world. They're winning, shooting 25 under par, and they're turning up at the US Open where you're going to win 2 over par. So it's, Simon's the technician here. He'll know that's a very different mindset, and you're not battle hardened.
I'm just thinking it through. Were you surprised that Mickelson was the one to go rather than Tiger? And do you think if Tiger had gone, we might have been having a different story?
Tiger was made an enormous offer. And he totally rejected it because he felt, if you look what he was chasing Nicklaus's record in the majors, right? So that's a very different pathway. That is historical, fabric of the game, embedding yourself in the golf history forever. Mickelson plays much more. If you were to take those two guys, they played golf in a very different way. Woods, like Faldo, like Mickelson, like a Nicklaus, very much a chess match, right? Mickelson, very much like Palmer, very much like Rory, much more of a gambler, right? I think there's a mentality there that defines a lot of the decisions they're going to make because of that's in their nature.
Yeah.
And I think, when Mickelson went and he probably took 3 or 4 of the other guys and said, okay, listen, so you can't blame like Westwood and Poulter and those guys, because there's normally no free lunch, but I think that really was one of the only free lunches on the planet. End of your career, you're great players, amazing reputations, and come and play with us. You'd go, right? But if you're in the peak of your career, are you going to become globally an icon in this live environment, which looked to us like, okay, you're promising us elite golf, but it looked like entertainment. It wasn't that you weren't the thing you said you were. We couldn't buy into that as golf fans. I think the whole thing has been an incredibly interesting exercise.
Yeah, and it's something we're going to touch on, I think, in a future series. Actually, the impact for the performers, the actors, the entertainers, the players, and you can't criticise them. And some of them are quite open. Others have, unfortunately, come up with sort of phrases that get repeated back to them. That looking to grow the game whilst there are issues.
It's the job of journalists to focus.
Absolutely, but I would have answered that sort of the Brooks Koepka way and just been a bit more honest. But that's each to them, and ultimately they were able to say, what are your gripes with the PGA Tour? Come and play 8 or 9 events. We're going to pay you a hell of a lot more money. Then we all look at these sportsmen and think that they love the game, they're passionate about the game. It's an absolute dream for them. It's the same as when we first went out there as a young kid, chipping into a washing machine or playing with our friends. But elite sport, as a performer, and I wasn't at the elite level, I danced around it. It's still a business, and it can be quite tiring, mentally tough. And if someone comes along with you and says, I can get rid of all of this, here's a guaranteed 50 million, play whenever you want, whatever lifestyle you want, we'll fly you around on our private jet, and you're going to have more than you ever would doing what you do currently, I don't think you can begrudge many of them.
That's why I asked about the Tiger not going, because when you compare it to a lot of the PIF investments, you look at the Saudi Pro League, let's get Ronaldo. He's at the end of his career, but we're going to go after Ronaldo. It wasn't, we're going to go after Messi. We're going to go after Ronaldo. Messi's gone off to the MLS. And they built a structure around him. So all of the other players, the longer list, if you like, the less well-known, that have also gone over because there's a huge amount of money at stake, haven't got the eyeballs on screens or the earworms in ears. It's all been built around CR7 Cristiano Ronaldo. And the big difference there is that's generated broadcast revenue. It's got interest from private commercial endorsements, private partners, private sponsors. So the Saudi Pro League as an ecosystem is now maturing because of that iconic signing that it probably wouldn't have had initially. And I really wonder whether we'd have been having a very different conversation had it been Tiger at the peak of his powers. And then the whole economic proposition would have been slightly different for the competition itself.
I think that one of the things that happened is if you look at one of their very early decisions, they hired Greg Norman, right? Probably, very much a Marmite guy, very fringy, right?
Did you coach him, Simon, or not?
I never did. The problem is, I've met him a couple of times, and he's always been amazing with me. So I couldn't really hold my
So
hand
he's
up
being
and
good
say,
Marmite rather than bad Marmite.
for me, which would be my personal opinion. But at the time, he's got like no chemistry with the Woods clan, no chemistry with the Rorys, etc., because he fell out with Nicholas, right? So I think there's always been some tribal stuff there where he's kind of sat as a loner. He was friends with Nick Price, not anymore. He was friends with Nicholas, not anymore. So when you've got that guy who's always sort of making the friction until something breaks, if the Saudis, Yasser or whatever, would have gone to, let's say, Steinberg, who manages, Woods and a few others, would that have all been different? If they would have not been told by Jay Moynihan, actually, you know what, golf isn't for sale, guys. You're coming here looking like golf is for sale. It's not for sale. Those are some fundamental mistakes, which I think those initial threads feed themselves all the way back to where we are now, as this looks as though it dismantles itself and we don't know what it's going to become.
I was going to say, what you know about the PGA Tour, and bearing in mind your kind of golf journey started as the PGA Tour, so you know these people, you know the personalities. Does it become a monster because it's a monopoly? And does the DP Tour become some sort of way of playing back into the PGA Tour for the people who've gone away from LIV? Does it become a kind of feeder championship? I mean, how does this play out?
Well, I think probably there was an option in the very beginning to help DP World Tour, right? And then when it became like, instead of going into a harmonious way of, hey, listen, how would this work? How would this work? Then it went into a battle. That for me was definitely a Greg Norman dynamic of, okay, if I can't have this, you're not going to have it either, and I'm going to blow it up, right? That is a bit that. So now there's the rational business decisions, which you might look for, Alex, start to vanish, right? And now you start to have irrational, emotional decisions, which cost a lot of money. Of, I'm going to do this anyway. And when you come down to sort of looking at, the ecosystem, the golf professional has always had, the professional golf tours has always had the tendency to be like a mirror smashed into every corner of the room, right? It hasn't had much cohesion. You take someone like Nick Faldo at their best, they'd be invited to play the three majors because they would have gone into it, and then maybe Nicklaus would have invited Faldo to play in his, and maybe Arnold Palmer would have invited him to play in Bay Hill. That was it. So there was always a bit of protectionism there. Now you've got this alignment, the cooperation between PGA and DP World, where the 10 best DP World players go to America to play. All of this is good snakes and ladders, as you go up and down the board, but the board, the whole board has to be counted. The whole of the ecosystem, the content creators, the indoor golf, all of the ways you can start to absorb more young people into the game must become a part of the cost structure. Otherwise, the funding model is actually not properly done. You're not funding the whole of the model. You're only funding the bits you want.
Yeah, I think what was quite interesting was there's obviously that period where they were expecting the PGA Tour and LIV to do a deal, and there was talk they were going to do a merge. And if that had been their strategy, and they'd been knocking on the door and just been told no, and they thought, okay, well, we're going to be aggressive. We're going to take some of your nights and so on and so on. And then by all accounts, then suddenly news broke that they'd signed John Rahm. I'd wonder if you could go back to them now and say, do you think that was a wise decision? Or should you have continued to actually then eventually, with what may have been their original aim to actually have a stake of the PGA Tour and be at that table? Whereas I think as soon as they did that, I think talk of the merger just sort of stopped.
Will some of those players be writing kind of mea culpa letters to the PGA? Let me back in, please. And how will they be met by those people at the PGA who have reason to bring them in, but also big reason to shut the door?
I think it will go personality by personality. I don't think that Bryson, by putting his name into the lawsuit against the anti-competition against PGA Tour will have too many PGA Tour friends. John Rahm is an interesting guy. I think that he kind of does his own thing. What is interesting is that Mickelson's brother was John Rahm's manager. So that could have been why John was pulled here. What I don't know is, what will happen to DP World Tour. I think that's more fragile than we think it is. I think PGA Tour has strengthened itself. And then I don't think that LIV has enough substance there under any kind of conditions to exist at the price point it does. If it came down to like a DP World pricing, then I think it can definitely exist. But its talent is getting older. The players that it's paid for are getting older and not less expensive. So they hold the cards, I think.
And do you know what they're doing with the Asian tour? Are they going to continue to fund that, or
you would have to think that will come to an end, right? So that the Asia One and all of the other places where the Saudis through Norman bought Asia so that the LIV players could get world ranking points, and so whereas that's not really needed, will they continue to behave like that? If PGA Tour ends up being the supreme winner, hopefully it has the good grace to find a pathway back for the talent that wants to come back to the PGA Tour who went to LIV. I hope that. I know you can be quite annoyed with people for things they've said, but after 2 years, you're going to get over it. I hope, and you'll be paid to get over it, right? But us as golf fans, from the two young kids, boy and a girl, playing golf in a field, all the way up through every single development tour, all the way to the PGA Tour and the 4 big tournaments. I hope that will all be priced into this one thing while there's an awash of money.
I think what was interesting in your report was the context you put around the earnings situation. We all think that the earnings are sky high for golfers, and they are. But then you put it in the context of other world global sports people, and in the top 15 Forbes, five golfers in the top 50 and none in the top 20 or something like that. It shows that if the PGA have the teeth and want to do it, they want to turn it into Netflix, or they want to get the eyes and bums on seats, that there's a lot of space still there, isn't there?
Huge amount of space is still in that marketplace. Just looking at the earnings, Rory could probably buy Gloucester Rugby Club 10 times over and still have some change in his pocket to fund it. So that's a conversation we might have to have at some point. I do, though, think
he's invested into Ulster.
Has he?
Yeah.
No, that's a disappointment. I do, though, think that what we'll see is a lot of hullabaloo now because PIF are pulling out their funding from LIV. I think there'll be a scrambling of conversations to try and keep that competition on next year, but it will be at vastly reduced amounts, and it'll be interesting to see whether they can bring any commercial partners on board to try and address some of the issues that Simon mentioned. But my gut feeling is there'll be a market correction. So I think over the next couple of years, we'll start to see a dialing back of some of those tour prize funds. The sponsors are probably going to be sighing a big sigh of relief that they're not going to have to pay over the odds to maintain their connection because they've got this disparate or this additional competition that they're potentially having to pay for. So I think correction over the next couple of years, and that's not going to plateau player earnings. They will still be paid handsomely because it is a very lucrative sport to be involved in.
I think, James, what you sort of said, I don't necessarily think, the golfers, there's that much growth for them to be paid as much as some of the Major League Baseball players or the NFL, or the NBA, and interesting, Formula One hasn't actually increased that much. Actually, the drivers' wages haven't gone up that much. But it's almost about, is there growth for those that are in the, top 20 to 70 in the world? Now, is there growth for that? And that's the big question mark, because if you look, going back to the financials, is what we obviously look at, some of those sports, those heartland sports, do generate a lot more revenue than golf ever will. So, where we want to get to is that players are paid what the tours can pay sustainably, but also achieving some of their other goals, which is making the game as accessible as possible. So, trying to grow the game globally in a structured way, making sure there's the infrastructure, so on and so on. So, the goal isn't for the tour to try and pay Rory, Tiger, Scotty, Cam Young as much as possible. So that's a couple of points. And the other thing I think, the tour needs to think about, and it's challenging, is to reward the players that didn't go and stayed. But, I'm trying to think of the chap's name. I think he came second in the Masters twice and now has had a couple of back injuries, very thin golfer. But anyway, I think he was offered 125 million and turned it down. And subsequently, his career hasn't gone on. But that is unfortunately business. That is life. We all have opportunities to go and join TNT Sports or stay with Sky Sports, and or go to beIN in Qatar.
It's business.
So it is business. We often do hold our sports teams and leagues to a higher moral standard because we want them to achieve so many different things that a normal business wouldn't.
I started with you, Simon. I want to finish with you. Do you look at golf in the future and think, I'm excited about where this goes, whether it's short form games, whether it's stuff being played indoors, whether it's, Netflix treatments and Drive to Survive with golf rather than... does that get you excited? Or
assume you haven't watched Full Swing then, have you?
No.
Okay, that is the Netflix version.
Why didn't they go Drive to Survive though?
Well, it is.
I know, but use the same...
Yeah. I think it is. It's exactly the same. You mean the actual words?
The name.
No, it's the same production team.
I mean, come on.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine Formula One might own that.
Well, maybe they made some money. Would have made some more money.
Yeah.
But sorry, yeah.
No, I think that if you look at the leadership, I think that the leadership, the people the PGA Tour have picked, Brian Rolap, the leaders for me do definitely hold the history of the game as one of the real pillars, a foundation, a steel strand into the ground. That I think is important, and I think it's heartening. If you look at the way a lot of the players have behaved and they've supported the tour, even though they had something lucrative over here, that shows me that the love of the game and the fact that history and behavior, etc., is still important. I think that those things are very encouraging. There have been some unusual players in our normally very quiet clubhouses. They've come in with guns blazing and all sorts of, cowboys with money flying out. Didn't expect to see them. Looks like they're leaving. Who remains? I don't think we're going to know. But in this time period, we will be able to watch it as it unfolds.
Mm.
But is that exciting? Are you excited by it?
Yeah,
or is it just a change.
No, I don't think it is just a change, because I think there was a status quo that, there were no ripples on that pond post, before 2020, let's say 2021. It was this number of events. Here were the pipelines. The board looked exactly the same every single year. Sometimes the players moved over, but the board was the same. The environment was the same. Now, I think in including content creators, the competition, I think, has now come, we are all of us in sports competing for people's attention, right? And attention is very fleeting. People say a 16-year-old won't sit and watch a 4-hour program, and I think that's probably true. But they can have all of these little other gateways to join the game. I hope that gets bonded and brought together.
That's the secret, isn't it, Rob? Finding other ways to get that kind of interaction and the eyes on the game.
Unlocking new audiences, providing, that's basic, isn't it? Basic business, providing products that people want to buy and in a way that they want to provide them and at a point at which they need to buy them. And that's the big challenge with any shifting demographic. And, as generations move, what we saw as golf in this instance, or professional football, rugby, and whatever you want to look at, the youth of today are looking at it through a very different lens, and with a vast array of different technologies that sport, because that's our business at the moment, sport has to engage with and make sure that they kind of really capture the imaginations of those people, because that's the lifeblood of what comes next.
And I think the sad thing, looking back at it, if you go back 5 years and said someone was prepared to put $4 billion into golf, how do you think we could do this to have a nice sustainable product, grow the game, do all these things? I doubt they'd have said, let's create a LIV Tour. They'd have used it in other ways. And the player that I forgot the name of was Will Zalatoris.
Yeah.
And is he right about that?
He is.
So he turned down
Zalatoris or
Or Alex. Well,
No.
Alex is always
No,
right.
the thing which is amazing, if you came in and said, okay, here is probably going to be about 6 billion US, right? Is there anything that we could do to golf that would improve it in any way? We'll fund it. That would have been amazing. The ladies' golf. The ladies' golf is an incredible platform. The quality of the players is just driving. There's great rivalries. It's completely global. It's an incredibly organized system. The LET players, there's a place where you could have had support, which I know they've looked at. But if you brought all of that together and you said, okay, not men's, not women's, but golf, from the beginning all the way around, you could have created an amazing system, I would think, and have some changeover.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, that's great. Thank you very much. What an astonishing 4-ball we'd be. And that's it for another episode of Sports Structured Podcast with Leonard Curtis. I hope we've shown you we do things a little bit differently. Yes, there's informed conversation and debate, but it's backed up by data, research and recommendations aimed at growing longer lasting and more sustainable sport for years to come.